Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Oxford Seminars in Cartography. My name's Nick Millee, and I'm the map curator at the Bodleian Library, and I'm also a trustee of the Historic Towns Trust. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome everybody to this first of our series of 4 seminars focusing on the European Historic Towns Atlas project. So, welcome to Oxford from wherever you may be. I know that the audience this evening is from all around the world, so that's very exciting. We're delighted to welcome everybody to come and join us. Now, this is a Zoom webinar, and what I'd like to say is that if you want to ask questions at the end of the session, then my colleague Liz Bagent will be here to curate a series of questions from the audience. If you could use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to scroll down there and we will be monitoring those questions throughout Daniel's talk, and we'll be able to ask him questions once the talk is concluded. So that aside, I would just like to alert you to another seminar which is taking place again by Zoom. And it's part of the Cambridge Seminar in the History of Cartography series. And this will take place at next Tuesday, the 3rd of May, when the speaker will be Joy Slapnig from Royal Holloway, University of London. And Joy will be talking about the idea of the indigenous map, examples from the RGS IBG collection. So Joy has been working at the Royal Geographical Society, and I think that'll be a great talk. It's at 5:30 p.m. UK time. So an hour after this seminar, but on Tuesday of next week. Now, you will have realized that we've been rather ambitious, and we've gone for a series of 4 seminars on the European Historic Towns Atlas project. And after today, we have a seminar at the same time next week. That's on Thursday, the 5th of May, when Keith Lilly, who'll be well known to many of you in the audience, and he's certainly a friend of Tosca of many years standing. Keith will be talking about the European Historic Towns Atlas, Great Britain. The week after, we'll have Sarah Gearty, and Sarah on the 12th of May will be talking about the Atlas project in Ireland, which I think is going to be an absolutely terrific talk. And then we have a break for a week before the series rounds off on the 26th of May. And we'll have Katalin Schende, who will be talking about the Atlas project in Central and Eastern Europe. So 4 contrasting geographical areas, and we hope some terrific cartographic stories to tell, which we hope will be of great interest. So I'm really thrilled to be able to welcome Daniel Stracke to a Tosca audience. Here's Daniel with a wonderful backdrop there. Thrilled to bits. Daniel will be talking about the Atlas project in Germany, but Daniel has been a driving force in terms of the European Historic Towns Atlas project. He's a medieval historian by training, and his PhD thesis, published in 2013, was entitled Monastic Reform and Late Medieval Town. Since 2004, he's been working at the Institute for Comparative Urban History in Münster. He's a researcher, an editor, and author of the German Historic Towns Atlas project. And since 2020, he's been one of the conveners of the Atlas Working Group in the International Commission for the History of Towns, along with Keith Lilly and Katalin Schende. So, without further ado, I look forward to welcoming Daniel and to hearing all about the European Historic Towns Atlas, Germany. Daniel, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's very kind. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to all the organizers. I try to share my screen now. Is my screen properly shared? Right, start the presentation. Okay, here we go. Thank you to all the organizers. It's been terrific. In fact, it has been rather Germanesque in terms of organization, if you can take that as a compliment, which I hope you do. Yeah, it is a great pleasure to be able to talk to you about not only our work at the Institute for Comparative Urban History, the Institut für Vergleichende Städtegeschichte, not only about historic towns atlases in Germany, but also give you a glimpse of the European Historic Towns Atlas project as a whole. So, and by that way, also paving the way for my dear colleagues, Sarah, Katalin, and Keith, who will be doing the next talks, as Nick kindly mentioned, and by introducing you to what amounts to the longest running and biggest joint venture in urban research at large. So this is what I hope will happen in the next few minutes. We'll be taking a look at the history of the European Historic Towns Atlas project. Then I'd like to take you to Germany and give you some examples of the maps and atlases and tell you about the German atlases. And then switch back to the European part and finish with a brief outlook. Now, I need to say that my report is not so much as a historian of cartography, although we deal with historic maps on a daily basis here, but as an urban historian working on one of the Historic Towns Atlas projects. So hence, it is very much an ISTG perspective from my institute and examples from our projects as well. Now, I think the best way to understand this map collection is really to look at it as some basic or rather fundamental research for comparative urban studies, because that's its purpose. So we're building something for others to build their research on. Now, what you see here is a distribution map designed by Heinz Stob, our institute's founder, in the 1970s and 80s. It's really not really historic, the historic urban network of Europe, as you know, but bits of continental urban Europe. So this is was his perspective, though, and it's one of several attempts to map out phases of town foundation and phases of their fortification. You see here, sorry, I need to switch to the other screen for that. You see here the complex symbology making up the colors for phases, for historic phases, and the symbols for simple walls, which may develop into something like this here, complex early modern fortification structures. So this kind of map really shows you how there's urban growth, waves of urban growth throughout Europe, but what of the individuality of towns? How do we construct these fortifications? How do we think about the chronology of the urban morphogenesis of each town? Now, there are many forms of evidence, written sources, archaeology to use, but really I think comparing maps, comparing town plans is the most natural thing to do. When you're looking for the town's ground plan, for its layout, its regularities and irregularities, they reveal a lot about the town's individual history and its rank in the historic urban network. So around 1900, really, in Germany, and this is, as I mentioned, very much my perspective on this issue. Around 1900, legal historians mostly understood the historic town plan to be linked to the town foundation as the oldest charter of the town. That was their notion. It's not that easy, as we know by now, but this really gave much of the impetus to voice claims like or pleas like Johannes Fritz's statement in Deutsche Stadtanlagen, his seminal work. It's my translation here. A collection of all German town plans. A German town plan book would be a real blessing, not only for our purposes. And this call was heeded by Paul Jonas Meier in 1909, who published a plan, first of all, a plan to design a Deutsche Städteatlas, a German towns atlas. So this is where the town plan books becomes an atlas idea. And Paul Jonas Meier really made some great headway. But he didn't publish a German towns atlas. He went for the regional one. So this is the Niedersächsische Städteatlas, started publishing in 1922. It went on to the 1950s. And so it's the historic towns atlas of this particular northern German region, Lower Saxony. You see here the main map for Brunswick. He had published, and really is not the only endeavor. So in this time, also Hermann Rothard in Westphalia in the 1930s started copying Westphalian cadastral maps, and in the Rhineland there were efforts as well. But this is something which really went into publishing, and if you compare it to the little sketches shown from the book by Johannes Fritz just on the other slide, you will see that there's a huge differences and a huge methodological advance to that. You see here, it's it's all in colors, and you have the change of scale, and the map goes right to the plot structure of the town. So this is the most important change. The focus is now on the plots. But it was not only research that called for this kind of institution. Soon another event emphasized the necessity to preserve the pre-modern urban ground plans. And this is, of course, the Second World War, which with its large-scale destruction of European townscapes, not only in Germany, of course, but you see here that's again the Brunswick map, and this is this northern part called Neustadt, seen from the north here. So this church would be St. Peter's here. This little square is that one, and you see the very linear town layout with the streets here. But you also see that there are changes to the original layout by their everyday use by pedestrians. So while much of the town has been rebuilt already in modern form, as you will notice, the original and the traditional urban form was still under threat, and not only by everyday use, like you see here. Destruction did not end with the war. The experience of modern warfare in timber-framed towns, timber-framed buildings, called for changes in building materials and in spatial organization. So, as you see here, this is, and I'm showing you atlas maps already from the current atlas projects. So this is the map with the destruction in the Second World War, and yellow is nearly totally destroyed. So you have Lange Straße, and superimposed here on Long Street is the new town layout as it emerged in the 1950s. Because there were new planning ideas around. Bernhard Reichow, for example, with his book Die autogerechte Stadt, the automotive city, really called for large streets, broad streets, and the buildings were modernized. So in many cases, history and heritage were bent to islands of tradition, like in Brunswick. And you see here another map with all the timber-framed buildings they could still find, moved to that spot around the churches to build something historic looking. So the advent of a new urban modernity really added to the loss of its pre-modern traces. And this is, in fact, the time when our success story begins. So the International Congress for the Historical Sciences in Rome in 1955 founded the International Commission for the History of Towns. And from this commission really came the impetus to create historic towns atlases and a European historic towns atlas. Now, the guidelines for that kind of endeavor were created by Heinz Stroop, our institute's founder, in cooperation with Elizabeth Lobel from Britain, and that was in 1968. And in the following year, 1969, already the British Atlas project started publishing. Now, the Germans took some more time and founded my institute, and then publication started. But really, in the 1970s and 80s, many countries followed suit. After Britain, it was Germany, and then really all the others slowly but surely fell into place. And with the fall of the Iron Curtain, the Central and Eastern European countries developed their own atlases as well. So this is the state as we have it now. And you see a multitude of atlas projects, and it's a conglomerate really of regional and national projects. So in countries like Austria, there's just one Österreichische Städteatlas, one Austrian historic towns atlas, like in Romania, like in Ukraine. In Poland, on the other hand, there are 3 regional atlases making up the national Polish project together. Now, in Scandinavia, we have a different situation. We have Iceland, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, all national projects together, forming a supranational project, the Scandinavian Historic Towns Atlas. And in Germany, we have several regional atlas projects plus a national one. So this is the kind of confusing landscape you enter. But for all the projects there has been a huge output, as you see here. So in September of last year, we counted 581 atlases, and the numbers steadily rising. So you might want to check our website. I'll give you the link later on, because this is really a nice resource, an interactive map getting you to all the online content of the projects. But so you see here, as there are 5 projects in Germany, we have a big cluster of German atlases. And we don't only have 5 atlas projects, but by now we have 7 publication series, because the first ones, the greenish ones here from our institute, have been superseded by new ones. So it started off with the Rheinische Städteatlas. I'm sad to admit. So in 1972, and with today 104 volumes, the Rheinische Städteatlas started. The German national project followed suit, now superseded by the Deutsche Historische Städteatlas, where I'm working in. Westfälische Städteatlas with its successor. Then came the Hessian regional project, and even in 2019 we had a new edition, the Brandenburgische Städteatlas. So this amounts to almost half of the publications in the series are from Germany for that very reason. But really, what is a town's atlas? I'd like to refer to Heinz Stroop's original model and concept. He proposed a very limited range of material to publish. So this is one main map in the scale of 1 to 2,500. Added to that, a modern map in 1 to 5,000. So to make sure you see more of the surrounding area in the modern map, because more development has taken place. So a modern map of today. But the missing link between those is his developmental map or growth phases map. It is based on the 19th century main map and then reconstructs the development of the town in the scale of the modern map. So you can superimpose them and with some light behind it. That was very old school in those days. It was very modern in those days. It's old school now. So you could trace the development down to the modern town. With that came a topographic map in 1 to 25,000 to show you the surrounding area, a town view, a town seal, 2 pages of text, and that's it. 2 pages for Bad Mergentheim and for Cologne and any other small or large town. A very basic documentation of the town's topography and growth. Now let's have a closer look at this 1 to 2,500 main map, because it really is the foundation of it all. And for our German project, we picked up this idea from Heinz Job, that it's a cartographic source edition, as any historian would need to deal with the town. This is what it looks like. It is a plot plan, as you see here. So you have distinct, boundaries for the plot and for the buildings. You have buildings with special uses. This by now reminds you of the first atlas from Lower Saxony I showed you. But the most important thing is the main source for creating this map, because it is a redrawn map. We have cartographers working in the institute on these atlases. The main source are cadastral maps, dating mainly, so Heinz Job thought, to the 1820s and 30s. Now, if you're familiar with Elizabeth Bajan's and Roger Kane's book, The Cadastral Map in the Service of the State, which I hope you all are, then you know, no, it's not that easy. There have been various territories being later and earlier, but never mind that. I just put up some examples to you to emphasize that problematic axiom in the work. They're all not dating exactly to the same phase. But what is a cadastral survey? Very briefly, if you're not familiar with that, you have this lucky blue fellow here owning 2 plots of land and getting some revenue from it. That's a lovely situation for anyone. But then the surveyors come along, they survey the plots, they make a record. These records go straight to the archive, which is a blessing for all historians, but they also go to the tax office. So there are tax officials here which review the record. They also review the theoretic revenues a plot like this could create, and then take a look at the market prices for grain, and then go to the person, to the lucky owner, demand taxes, and they're duly hated in return, paid. So, but from this, and it's a really much more complicated process, but from this process derive a lot of wonderful sources for historians to delve into. We have these overview maps here, which show you the quality of the land, the use of the land in agriculture, all wonderful sources for any historian to look at. But we are most interested in these field maps, in these 19th century surveying maps. And mapping and surveying standards in the 19th century were very, very high. These maps are to the scale of 1 to 500 to 1 to 2,500, so very detailed, and we have everything we need to create these maps. In the tax office now, really what evolves is are much more records and more sources. It really comes down to be a kind of a paper GIS. So you have your identifier here, you have your polygons here in the map, you have the same identifier in the text row, and then attribute information. It's a Wohnhaus, a dwelling, or a house to live in. You have the name of the owner, Mr. Böttger. Gustav is his forename, he's a merchant. So all kinds of information, not only about the owner and the taxes he needs to pay, but also about the land use. And this kind of paper GIS could have been in use in the cadastral office for up to 50 years or more. And this is very often what we end up with as historians if we are that unlucky. So there has been a lot of wear and tear in the tax office. The edges are frayed. This specimen has been glued to linen fabric. And next to this erosion here, we have erasion as well. So in certain areas where the townscape has changed dramatically, they would have just erased the original drawing and put the new streets in there. This is about as disastrous as it gets. It's not always that bad for us, because when they just superimpose in a different ink a new building here, we can still see the original outlines of the original drawing, which is nice. In the other case, we need to refer to other sources to make sure we properly reconstruct the townscape in this for this very time. Now, this is what are the methodology we use for editing the sources, the cartographic sources would look like. Now, first, the map is georeferenced because we're using the GIS now, which is a huge advantage. And so we need our anchor points that are in existence in the town today. Then follows the redrawing not only of this bit here, but of all the map, of course. This involves some reconstruction where the map has been changed. We also complete the content of the map. When the cadastral sources, when the written sources say here was a garden, then we would introduce the garden here to make sure we understand the cadastral record as really one whole. And also we combine maps to make sure we stitch together the various field maps to make a complete picture. This would look like that one here for Mühlhausen in Thüringen, in Thuringia. And we also comment on what we've been doing to create this map, because it's not really that straightforward. So what are the sources? How did we deal with them? Would be in the text. And here in the top left-hand corner of the map, we also have an overview map giving you all the field maps we stitched together with their shelf numbers, with their dating and the scale. So as a user, you can very easily go on and check what we've done to the map. Now, the main map is really the biggest and the core of our atlas, but that's not all. We're also reproducing historic maps, and it really is or has been the input of our Eastern European colleagues in the 90s, who started this on a large scale with building new atlases with new concepts, and we thought, oh wow, yes, it is possible now. You can get a digital image and reproduce historic maps very nicely. So let's be inspired by that and include some of those. But as you see here, the original concept we followed did not really involve much reproducing maps. This was basically the modern map and the 1 to 25,000 topographical map. Now we still use the 1 to 25,000 map, and it's a wonderful source. It shows you the lay of the land, the situation of the town, water bodies, rivers, and all that. And it is really an official standardized military map produced in many German territories. So, and this shows you the first survey from the Rhineland and from Westphalia in comparison. You can very well work with all these maps and have them in the same scale and with roughly the same content. This is one way to compare the maps, but also for the individual town, you can build up, and we do this in the atlases, you can build up a series showing you exactly the town growth, how it extended across beyond its original medieval walls. And you see here there are also shapes in the building very indicative of certain periods of building, or you immediately realize, okay, there's some industrial complexes being built here. But we're not also only reproducing these standardized maps, we also take many other maps that are of interest to the historian. It's often a painful process to choose the ones we want to reproduce and leave some out. So these are bird's eye views, barely maps, you may say, but still very important for any historian to find, you know, the odd chapel, or see the building density is different here and in this area. And so this is a nice source. We usually include them, as we do military maps, which not only show you the military formations in particular conflicts, but also give you an idea of the surrounding area and of fortifications, for example, or the building fabric, or the density of the built-up area. Somehow the world always looks nicest in military maps. That's weird. But we also include planning maps, like this one from Schwerin. It's the residential town of the Duke of Mecklenburg-Schwerin at the time. And this is really what he planned to do with the town, which didn't work out. It's still very nice to go there, but these grand plans were not realized. But also industrial town like Dortmund would need to create planning maps to cope with the influx of population at this time of industrialization. So there are lots of other sources and source material to include: town views, aerial photographs, modern maps, still in the scale of 1 to 5,000. So there's a lot in these atlases. But besides publishing our main map and cartographic sources per se, we also try to highlight and map spatial aspects of urban history and of the urban history of that individual town. So again, Stoth's model to kick off with, it was really basically the growth phases map he provided. I think there's one small thematic map in each of the atlases, but it's really a minor undertaking, and we've changed that. We're still mapping town growth, of course. We do this by interpreting the main map, see where's the old town, where's the new town, how does archaeology, this is just a sample here, relate to that. Can we say that this part is older than the other part? So this is the developmental phases map for Mühlhausen. That really is the result of all the atlas text and the work that's gone into the atlas. And with these maps at not only comparable scales, but also in the same phases and with the same color scheme, so you can easily compare these maps in the German atlas. Now, the first phases map just shows you the old town and maps the growth to the 19th century. For everything beyond that, we include a developmental phases map in 1 to 25,000. And already you realize, oh, 1 to 25,000, they have the topographic maps. This is, of course, one of the big sources we use to create this map. Many others as well, but still, developmental phases are one result of working with this kind of map. So we're interested in elevation and how urban form interacts with the natural terrain. Using these kind of maps, so where are the promontories, what's happening, is there a castle on the hill, did the water bodies restrict growth, or was there a ford to have a road going there? A lot of questions for the urban historian and geographer to deal with here. I've already shown you a destruction map, so if it's worth it, like in Brunswick and Dortmund too, we map this as well, because there are, fundamental changes to the urban landscape. Oh, this is nice to show you. Of course, the topographic map, as from Krefeld here, already shows you the railway lines, and you see how these various lines restrict urban growth in this direction, and how the town started developing in that other one here to the northeast. But once you introduce color, you highlight the railways, you date them, you put up the historic dates to them, you probably differentiate between public railroads and those of companies. You really get a much more telling, a much more expressive picture. So this is what we do very often. We use the topographic map and highlight certain features and add other information to it as well. So there are a lot of themes to be shown in the atlases, and so this is just one rough sample of topics we deal with in these kind of maps. So it's industry, just like small-scale distribution maps of half of Europe, showing you trade relations and all this. Now, back to our main map. I've shown you examples of how we created that, but and the main map really is a standard map in the standard scale, 1 to 2,500 for all of Europe. But as you know by now, with decades of project work, with other projects coming in a little later, there's a lot of variation and standardization issues as well. Now, you can take a particular town type, like monastic towns, a town in which a religious community is very strong and exerts a lot of influence, like in Germany, Quedlinburg, like Melk in Austria, like Amach in Ireland, and Trebnica in Poland. You can compare with these same scale maps, can compare the town development and start thinking about why did the towns develop like this, and what was the particular influence, topographically speaking, of that religious community. But there are variants. There's a lot of variation, in fact, across Europe. And I've come up with 5 different basic types I'd like to show you. They vary in various parameters. Never mind that now. But this is not to lay blame on anyone. But you know, cartographic sources are different. There are different research traditions in the individual countries to be reckoned with. Project resources vary. So there's a lot of there are a lot of good reasons to vary, although in the end we would probably rather have one standard map layout. So this is the first model, and I've already mentioned that. It's a Städte model source edition. That's Howard Clark who first called that Städte model. I've just picked up on that. So this is what most of the German atlases look like, but also the Austrian atlas, the Croatian atlas. So there are several of them who pick up on this model and vary in some slight degree. The second variant would be a reduced content map. As you see here in this Swiss atlas, the use of color is greatly reduced. There's much more symbology. You have to take an account. It's not so easy to understand this map. You have to look twice which kind of forest you're dealing with. And perhaps even more fundamental, in the Belgium atlas, they have not mapped out the surrounding area. So this is a kind of reduction as well. Other projects have taken a different approach. They thought, oh, well, yes, we want to take all the give all the information provided by the Städte model, but we don't want to print in color because color, at least, used to be quite expensive in the printing process. And so they just split their information on two different maps to keep it readable in black and white, which is just as fine. So that's a multiple map approach. Distributing the information on a multitude of at least several maps. The Scandinavians did so. The colleagues from Romania still do so, and it's wonderful. It's working just as well. Our fourth variant would be Elizabeth Lobel's idea, publishing in Britain, which I've learned to call from Keith Lilly multi-period maps, which is great. It's the Ordnance Survey map superimposed with historic structures in reconstruction, and this is some fundamental difference, you might say, because Heinz Stoop had this idea that you want to keep the source edition and the interpretation in the phases map and the growth phases map separate, to make sure somebody else can go back to the source map, to the main map, and reinterpret it in a different way. This is perhaps something not as easily done because the dates are already written in the map, but still, it's a 1 to 2,500 map that compares with the others. Now, in some Atlas projects, that it has just been, the main map has just become a reproduction of the original sources, which works well when they're lucky to have the Französische Kataster, the cadastral map of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It looks beautiful, it works, and if it's to the right scale, why not? Now, I've mapped out these variants for you. So the Lobel multi-period map is not only a British thing. I've shown you the French example, but Italy, the Italian project does the same. We have the Städte model not only on the continent, but also in Ireland. Then reduced content maps are not very widespread, but we have yes, the reproduced maps here in the Czech Republic and in Ukraine, and also multiple maps, as I've told you before, in Scandinavia and in Romania. Now, for my brief outlook, I've kicked off with the Stope model and shown you how there has been innovation in the process of developing these atlases. Now, the sleeve format has changed, additional content has been introduced, and I hope Sarah Girty will say something about the written information, the gazetteer of topographic information, which is particular to some atlas projects. We have online and interactive versions I didn't go into now. And today we are producing geodata as reusable research data. And this is one last point I'd like to make. We are, as GIS users, our cartographers do this now. We take geodata from all kinds of public sources and use them for our thematic maps. I think this one is shows very neat the benefit of doing so. This is a contour model, a digital contour model superimposed with today's map, and we've then just overlaid the historic structure of this castle. Now, we are ourselves in our project, in particular with the main map, we're producing geodata ourselves. So our data is reusable in other research, and we've done that. We've reused our own data here for our summer school, the social topography, which went very well with students. So now this is, if you recall, one of the basic propositions or basic goals of the Atlas producing community to produce basic research for others to build on. And as more and more work in geography and history is being done in GIS, this is the kind of basic data for other projects we produce as well, next to the print atlases. So that's just a little bit of fun for conclusion. Our data is reusable, as I said, but I've used the data from Mühlhausen and Thüringen here to produce maps for Mühlhausen in all the different styles. So you see here the Swiss map for Mühlhausen. You see a multi-period map. You see Mühlhausen in Ireland here with the Irish color scheme and the split map as well. So this means on the data level, we are really overcoming the differences in style that somehow still make up the print atlases. And with this, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much for your patience and for your interest in the subject. If you have any questions, please drop me an email and refer to this website. We have lots of English-speaking content on the Historic Towns Atlas of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel. That was an absolutely splendid talk, and it really is an excellent start to our series of seminars looking at these atlases of historic towns. I enjoyed that very much indeed. I should say that I once spent a very happy year at your institute, so it's always a pleasure to hear more about it. So we have many people drawn from a whole variety of countries in our audience, and I'd like to invite you all to put any questions that you would like to pose to Daniel in the question and answer box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. I'll pick those up and pass them on. But perhaps I could start myself with focusing on the theme that you started with, which is comparative urban history. And that indeed, of course, is the name of the institute where you're based. And I'd like if you could just expand on what that has meant, what it might mean, and how you see the role of the atlases in that. I'm sure our audience would join me in feeling that we need to get a bit more of a handle on what comparative urban history might mean.
Well, yes, that's a bit of a poser, really. A difficult question for me to answer, because as you've seen in the beginning, the field is vast, and so there's a variety of methodologies. I've briefly hinted at the type of towns, the town type approach. This really has recently become a renewed focus of research. So there has been a volume published by Ferdinand Oppel and other colleagues from Austria and Poland on town types as a comparative basis, or a basis for comparative research, because you wouldn't pick any town like Jakarta in my back and compare it with Münster. That wouldn't work too well. But compare it to Amsterdam, really, because this is not Jakarta, but ancient Batavia as a Dutch colony would make more sense. So the atlases, I think, are a very good basis to conduct that kind of research, and there's a lot to pick from. Almost 600 towns. The documentation varies, I have to admit, but the human brain can work around the difficulties much better than a machine could. Yeah, so
the idea is to compare the morphology of towns, the sort of visual comparison, and then to go further to see what might be the causes and fundamentals underlying similar morphologies.
Exactly. I think it's there's a hierarchy of questions, of course. What was when where is probably where you start at, but you would try and end with a why and come up with explanations. So yeah, documentation for the individual town is very much what the atlases do, and researchers then take it to the next level and try to come up with comparative questions concerning the morphology, and well, and perhaps use our cartographic basis to project other data on them, like with the GIS you now can. Very soon we'll be starting a joint project with the University of Torun in Poland with Professor Manchaya. We'll be comparing towns of various types, of 3 types, in Germany and in Poland. On the data level, it's really a GIS-based approach, which is a novelty for us, and try and see how the particular institutions that make up, say, sorry, I'm lacking the word, an ecclesiastic town or a metropolis or a bath town in their particular way. How did these institutions form urban landscapes?
Thank you. That sounds very exciting, and we wish you every success in your new project. Can I perhaps ask a question then linked to that, which is, as you described it, it seems that there's both a research component to the project, and perhaps that's sort of is the truest to the Heinz Stuhl model that you described for us, and then increasingly a component which looks to a wider audience who might find the maps themselves fascinating in revealing something about the place where they live, might enjoy the historical reproductions, might enjoy other images of towns with which they're familiar. Do you see that sort of scholarly popular shift? Not that the scholarly is lost, but the growth perhaps of the scope of the project to reach out to a wider and audience, to include a popular audience.
I think we very much do. In fact, we're trying to build that kind of response and that kind of audience for the atlas. In many cases, of course, we're dealing with Magdeburg now at present. Magdeburg has been well researched, but to have a condensed history of the town with this view on urban form and on yes, where people actually now live, how did it come about? I think this is very appealing to many. And in cases like with our with the Westphalian counterpart to my Deutsche Historische Städteatlas, we have the situation that the atlas almost, or in many cases for the smaller towns, is the first real well-researched attempt of telling the story of how the town evolved. And this is really quite exciting. We have some public outreach. We've tried to make the teachers acquainted with the atlas. For Mühlhausen, we always have public presentations that are well received. But really, this question should be put to Sarah Girty, because the Irish team is very, very good at, reaching beyond the academic sphere, and this is much of our. We try to follow that model as good as we can.
Thank you. I think that's one of the advantages of our series, that we can take up these kind of questions across national borders. So thank you for that reminder. We'll make sure we ask Sarah about that. Could I now relay a question from Keith Lilly? I'm sure many in our audience know Keith. If you don't, he is the chair of the British arm of the European project. And Keith asks, the 1 to 2,500 scale main map in the German atlases is quite technical in its content, showing morphological details such as plots and buildings for a single period or era based on the field map dates. Do you know how these maps are being used by the atlas audiences? Is there some guidance or instruction provided on how the maps might be used, for example, by urban historians, local residents, and so on? For example, by tracing off the morphological elements and analyzing these, or using the map as a basis for plotting out other kinds of historical and archaeological material. And Keith has a particular interest in answering that, as he'll tell us when he talks to us about the British atlases next week. But it's a rather long question, but of course a good one from Keith. So I wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, it is. Well, the main map is really why the atlases came into being. I think it's the core thing, and this is why we have cartographers working on that. However, German research for the last decades has not been very strong on urban morphology. So really, I think this is an underappreciated piece of the atlases. I think, actually, to my view, I don't think it's very technical, because with the color scheme, you immediately see where are buildings, where are streets, and you get the idea of how the town looks like in the 19th century. It's really much of a snapshot image. So I think in this respect, it is well appreciated, but less so for the urban morphology. But less so for the for urban morphologic analysis, like we do in the Atlas when we're preparing our growth phases.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be a chance next week for Keith to develop that theme. So we look forward
to that.
Yeah. And we've got another question from the British Historic Town Atlas team, this time from Giles Darks, who I'm sure you know, and if our audience members don't know, Giles is the cartographer for the British Historic Towns Atlas, and examples of his excellent work have been appreciated by many people in the audience, I'm sure. So Giles asks a rather fundamental question, and he says, is there much difference between countries in how a historic town is defined? Just what is a historic town?
Oh dear.
That's a difficult question to answer in your native language, let alone working in another language. So we'll give you perhaps a minute to think about that.
Actually, it's not really a language thing. It can be boiled down further. What is a town? To that question, and probably when we figured out we have to dissolve the institute, I don't know, because there's so Giles apologizes in the chat. That's kind. What are so by our Atlas standard, what is a town? What are towns that may have an atlas? I think this is very much the status as the legal body of being, or the legal the legal status of being a town at some point. So there are
and that's defined presumably by things like having a charter or having a charter for a market and
yes,
that kind of thing.
Although some of them only became towns in the 19th century, but that's fine for us. Yeah, so a different question would be how do we choose towns to build an atlas for that, or to create an atlas for that. And but nobody asked that, so no answer for that.
Thank you. I think that's a perennially difficult question, isn't it? What is a town? And I wonder if there are any examples of historic towns which have been the subject of atlases, which now to a modern eye look very small indeed, but have an historic presence that goes far beyond their present dimension.
Absolutely. Again, our Westphalian series, which really focuses on all Westphalian towns, gives very good examples of that. And we're right now thinking about the distribution map I've shown you at the start on a new level, making this in the GIS, recreating it and have it overworked. And now we're reviewing all the literature that came about when it was created. And it's always this question: when is which settlement a town? And the idea is that there's a bundle of criteria. In the Middle Ages, a fortification would have been a strong indication that it's a town, but in the industrial area, that would be a useless criterion. So a town charter is indicative for a medieval town, but for the early modern period, that's really not much use, because towns didn't usually retain these medieval rights. So yeah, a lot of criteria which change over time. So you're when you're mapping out phases of town growth, of town foundations, you would always have to accompany that with some commentary of what is a town in that particular time. This is really difficult, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Nick Millie, other host, points out that Anmouth is the tiniest British town that the British team are tackling. Yeah, we in this country we're alert to this notion of tiny places, but still having the status of towns.
We really went, sorry to interrupt, just to add a comment, we went on an excursion with Professor Johanek to Strasbourg, and on our way we stopped in 3 former imperial towns, so towns that were directly, more or less directly, ruled by the emperor. And one of that was just 2 streets, 100 meters long each, a few houses and gates blocking off the streets, and that's it. So I think it was Zell am Hammersbach. So with this kind of imperial town reputation and status, but very diminished urban ground plan and substance to go with that.
And that, of course, is an important historical phenomenon in its own right. So it's important to include those places. So another question from our audience, from Thomas Sander. He asks if you could direct him to the website that gives access to the German towns that you've described as having been covered in atlases. He is interested particularly in the town of the former abbey town of Hersfeld, now Bad Hersfeld in Hesse.
Yes.
I don't know if you know offhand whether that has been the subject of an atlas, but perhaps you could pop in the chat the link to the website that will help Thomas and many others in our audience who I'm sure will want to follow that up.
I will, thank you.
While we're doing that, I'm wondering if I could introduce then another theme, just perhaps to go back to a question of outreach. I know that the British team, we've been trying to link particularly with other institutions who are interested in the history of various towns and other events. So, for example, Cities of Culture, which is a big project to pick a town and focus on it as it and its culture as a method really of fostering town regeneration and town pride. I wonder, does that kind of thinking feature in the German Atlas project?
Not so much yet. I think we try to make use of town festivities around jubilees, like 500 years of town foundation or first mentioning of the town. So this would be the point when towns get more interested in their history than they would usually do. In their heritage and in conveying something from that history to a greater public, then we would probably approach them, and if we have the capacity to work on an atlas, suggest that we create one or create a joint project, because this is all very expensive. But this would be a kind of event when towns also have some money to spend, and I think creating an atlas is always a good thing and a lasting thing.
I think you're preaching to the converted when you say having an atlas is always a good thing. I think that we can all agree on that.
I hope so.
I wonder if I could take you back now to a topic which you touched on, which is digitization. And you've mentioned some aspects of digitization used in producing maps. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how digitization has changed how the products of Atlas projects are actually consumed. So whether people are looking for online projects and what they're hoping to do with the atlases, whether that has changed in an era of digitization.
I think they're really two worlds set apart in a way. The print atlas is still very popular and interesting for many many people who want to have something, you know, something material and want to browse the maps and enjoy that. It's probably mostly the younger generation that would try and find online content, well, for our Atlas projects in the institute, we try to not you know, just publish online the same content and bring you a PDF version of the atlas, which would be fine, but there are legal obstacles to that in our case. So, but as we have so many thematic maps and mappings and create data for various themes, we can superimpose them and make maps that are difficult to read, like our growth phases map. We can create online versions for that, interactive versions that make it much more comfortable to use. So this would be a real step ahead for many things. And now, I don't think the Atlas work per se has changed a lot, but we are adding further products to the print atlases. So the interactive versions would be one, but also the raw data is increasingly interesting. I'll never forget how I was in a session in a congress in Helsinki when a researcher from Rome said, "Yeah, we're digitizing the whole cadastral map of Rome." And everyone said, "Wow, that's amazing. That's a huge piece of work." And she added, "And in a different university in Rome, they do the same." And I thought, wow, how can this be possible? So much work, so much duplication of effort. Why that? And so increasingly, there's the idea of reusing research data, but that needs infrastructure, that needs standards and metadata standards. So this is a very complicated process we're now in the middle of, and so creating such an infrastructure and getting the digital work ahead in this respect too. May have lost track of your question. I'm sorry.
No, that's extremely helpful, and your comment about the sort of generational divide in how maps are consumed, as it were, is very interesting, I think, as we think to the future. But to link in to what you were saying there about the practicalities of work, Nick Millie, Ever Practical, asks some logistics questions. So, for example, how big is the team in Germany? How's it funded? Is there a policy in place for selecting towns to feature? How does all that work in practical terms?
Oh, yes. Well, we have a team of two. So it's a cartographer, Oliver Rathmann, who's just come new to the project for our current work on Magdeburg, and this is great fun working with him. He started with with at least very little experience working with historic maps, but you know, it takes an energetic mind and someone who's really willing to barge into this, and he's done a wonderful job and is still doing that. And so it's a cartographer and a historian slash copy editor kind of person, in this case me, for our Deutsche Historische Städteatlas, the German national project. And we have another cartographer working on the Westphalian one, supported by various people from the team and the institute. But the Westphalian project has, you know, a kind of fixed body of researchers with various specialities in Westphalia who support it. That's very nice. But with the German national project, we always start afresh. Usually we have strong ties and the support of the municipal archives, which is great. They know their stuff and they're interested in the public outreach and in the producing maps and publishing their material. And so we work with a team of authors, usually from the outside. That would be local scholars or the team from the archive who know their individual town's history very, very well. And we're very lucky with Magdeburg in this respect, in particular at the moment. And sometimes, you know, a traditional historian would not be so map aware, so that would be the point where I come in and try to add something to the mix and you know, write the critical commentary for our maps and all that. Yeah. Oh, the selection of towns. Yes, so there's the story. It's legendary, probably not even true, but that you know, wherever Heinz Stob went and enjoyed staying on his you know, on the vacation after his marriage and things like that, that would be likely candidates for an atlas. By now, that was back in the days when the institute was very big and there were several people working on the atlas, and there was a lot of output. But now we really much depend on where funds come from, and so this is usually split half for the institute and half for the archive or other institution we're working with, and they procure funding from various organizations and funding bodies.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Can I ask you what future projects you have in mind, both for yourself and I mean the German projects, and also whether you see any trends for the European Atlas as a whole?
Right.
Perhaps it's hard to ask a historian to speculate, because I know we like to have evidence for everything we say, but perhaps we can ask you what you think are some likely trends.
The next atlas for us is always a difficult question, because we start looking for funds for likely candidates who in our particular network of researchers may be interested in helping us and getting an atlas on the way, administratively speaking, with this town. And you know, it's always difficult to say. So I don't know what we'll do after 2023, when we've hopefully finished Magdeburg in time. Yeah, but as for myself, I'll be taking some minor role in the joint German and Polish project. I'd love to really dive into some comparative work because I'm familiar with a couple of towns now, and I love dealing with and interpreting maps. I'm interested in GIS use, but I also like my colored crayons and draw on paper for creating maps. So this would be a wonderful thing. Um, Ferdinand Oppel, the Grandmaster from the Österreichische Städteatlas, some time ago shoved me into the direction of, we need a comparative study from you for industrial towns in Westphalia and in the Rhineland. I thought, okay, Ferdinand, if you insist, I'll do my best. And it was great fun. It was just a tiny little paper, but this kind of work would very well suit me. And also bringing together the map, which shows you all the town, and archaeological evidence, because they really work on smaller sites, looking in one pit and in the next and then the next. And a map really very much can help to join the dots the archaeologists create. So this is another very, very trying and very interesting field to engage in.
Yeah. Thank you. And do you see any more pan-European developments? Is there anything that you think we should be looking out for, say, in the next 10 years?
Well, a pan-European project for really a research project going into the history, probably with something like not just a distribution map, but to interlink it with all the other material and go in really deep would be great. I think we have a lot of stuff to help build that kind of project, and we have tried to muster European funding for first for our standardization issues and the things that the issues that come with the digitization of the atlases, but really this would be a great point at which to again look for EU money and build something like this. So anyone who has the idea to make that practical and just drop me an email. I'd be glad to assist with anything we have to offer. But I think Keith Lilly really is the kind of person who would who frequently brings up this topic, and I think eventually he'll be coming up with something that really sparks the money and brings a lot of resources for us to work on. Also, we have the International Commission for the History of Towns. We have this body of researchers who know the atlases very well, and I think this would also be a good starting point from which to generate ideas to work with the atlases.
Thank you. Well, no pressure there, Keith. We look forward very much to allowing Keith to respond when he comes to talk to us. Mm-hmm. So if there are no more questions from the floor, I'd like to draw us to a close, and by thanking Daniel very much indeed for this very stimulating paper and which is stimulating not only in its own right, but as a start to a mini series of seminars. Thank you very much. It's been
a pleasure.
A great pleasure to host you virtually in Oxford. So just for those of you members of the audience who missed at the beginning, our slide with our future seminars, we have seminars coming up on the 5th, the 12th, and the 26th of next month. You can find out the details from the Bodleian website. And I think there'll be a slide at the end scrolling through so you can see there. So we look forward very much to welcoming you all for those subsequent seminars, because I'm sure these things will accumulate and we'll start to not only see patterns, but find ourselves doing that very comparative urban history, which underlies the project. So can I wish you all a very good evening from Oxford, and thank you, Daniel, again on your behalf for a very stimulating paper. Thank you and goodbye.